Innovation is what guides and what differentiates companies. So if you think about what you learned before, you have to now do that so much faster. Now, the beauty is we have a lot more tools. We have a lot of smart people that have studied various fields. And so you have a lot more teamwork that I think is associated with the development. So we had these things called work stage gates, which have very disciplined approach in what you do at each one of the stages. You make sure that before you proceed to the next stage, your finances are in order, your consumer testing order, your capital spend is in. So there's actually a much more disciplined approach because there's so much that is being thrown at you. You have to be very methodical, disciplined, and determined as you go forward.
You're listening to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technologies in the food and supplements industries, brought to you by Trustwell, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams, VP of Marketing at Trustwell. If you're loving the conversation, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned to the end of the episode where you'll hear our guests tell us their key food industry predictions for 2025. All right, let's jump right in. On today's episode of Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, we're delighted to welcome Darryl Riley, a globally respected food safety and quality leader whose career spans over 30 years in the CPG industry, from leading roles at Hostess Brands to his current position as president at TQSM LLC. Darryl has championed a culture of excellence in food safety, innovation, and corporate responsibility across continents. He brings a rare blend of scientific expertise and people-centered leadership, making him a sought-after voice in food systems transformation. Welcome to the show, Darryl.
Glad to be part of the show and look forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I know we've got a lot of great things to talk about today. First off, I would love to hear more about your career over 3 decades, kind of what got you into it, and what are the major turning points that feel like were important in your career?
Sure. So I'm an engineer by background, really enjoyed the field, specifically designing equipment, working with equipment, buying equipment, and installing it and watching it operate. I got into originally the chemical industry, spent about 3 years there, and then moved into what we call the food industry. Although I didn't go directly into food, I went into what is known as coffee, which is a beverage product, and worked really in an engineering function in the R&D group, working with, at the time, supercritical CO2 extraction, which we use in order to decaffeinate coffee, and really was a great opportunity to learn and watch actually a process that you worked on become commercial. So oftentimes engineers get a chance to work on a lot of things that tend to get thrown out. In this particular case, what we worked on, actually the company invested in, and we installed 2 commercial units and was proud to be able to be part of that journey. I stayed in the engineering field and really became more interested then in international and asked whether or not I could participate in the international exchange program. And that really opened my eyes up, as well as my career, to a plethora of opportunities around the globe. And so I started on my global journey, working and living in different countries around the world, still working in the engineering field, but advancing. So I started in Canada, spent about 6 months there, then went to Japan, spent about 2 years there, which was really a very enlightening experience because I wasn't in Tokyo. I was actually in a small city called Suzuka, Japan, which borders the Pacific Ocean. And as you can imagine, it was a really small town and a lot of people had never seen me and I had never seen a lot of those people. So it makes up a lot of funny stories there. But it was really good learning opportunities. And I'll tell it later, but it was one of the areas really that helped change my attitude about work as well as leadership. I then repatriated back to the US. I was here for about a couple of years and then went back to Europe and spent then the next 10 years in Europe working in different locations and then advancing my career a little bit. So, started as an engineer working in factories, but then started to move a little bit further forward, starting to manage people, small projects, and building and advancing on your career. And so I spent about 3.5 years in a place in northern Germany called Bremen, Germany. I then transferred to a place in England called Banbury, England, and then went back to Germany and then lived for about 4 years there in Munich, Germany. So all told, it was about 10 years in Europe. And then after that, I repatriated back to the US, to Chicago, spent some time in Chicago, and then wanted to run my own R&D facility, was not able to do that, and then moved to another company in Battle Creek, Michigan, and then began another journey there in the quality area this time, R&D and quality, and then advanced my career there. Spent about 9 years in that company. And then, believe it or not, this is why you never burn your bridges, because the first company I worked at, they had asked me to come back. And so I came back as a senior leader there, spent a couple of years there, and then the company got bought out. So I went into a little bit of consulting, did that for a little bit, and then decided to go back into industry, and then worked at another company, which I spent the last 7 years. And that company also got bought out, and took a package, and then decided to go into my own consulting. So overall, I had a pretty adventurous career. I always tell people I had a lot of personal and professional development. I got married overseas, had 3 girls overseas. So I left a bachelor and came back married with 3 kids.
What an amazing story. So, the biggest question I have is just kind of how did those experiences living and working overseas kind of shape your view of work and your view of leadership, especially once you came back to the US?
It's a great question. And really, I model it on really 3 areas. So the first area that really helped my leadership, and just for background, I grew up on the East Coast, so I felt I was a bit of a brash engineer. People on the East Coast, we think we know everything. So when I went to Japan, it was a very interesting culture, because that's not their style at all. And after being there and recognizing it's not about how loud you speak, it's about how you listen and how you act, it really taught me quite a bit. And the thing that I walked away from Japan, amongst all of the great areas of learning, was a key area called humility. And I think the humility part is what really helped calm me down and made me into a much better person, as well as a better leader. The second experience I had was one of my assignments in Munich, Germany. And we had a role at the time that was called strategic planning manager. It was a role that they gave to R&D that was going into middle management. But what it was an opportunity to expose you to the business side of a company. And so you were involved with writing presentations and decks for the senior vice president. And not only were you writing the decks, he actually let you help present the decks in the senior management meetings. And that's where the learning took place, because you were sitting behind him at the table with all the senior executives on the executive leadership team in the company. You got an opportunity to see how they interact, what questions they ask, what insights they offer. And you got a chance to do that sort of in the crow's nest. So for me, it was a great learning opportunity. And I really had a better understanding of what value the various functions bring into a company. And so for me, the second part of that was business acumen. So I consider that to be a great learning. The third area is I went and I actually led a global quality organization for a company. And during the time that I was there, we actually went through a large recall. In fact, it's the largest recall in the US history. And it involved a company that made peanuts. And I was involved with helping not only lead the company out, but also devising and implementing systems in place in order to remediate that, as well as I had to testify to the US Secretary of Commerce. So I had to testify the congressional pages. And so if you think about an experience, it really opened up your eyes to, one, making sure that you were very cognizant that this is a food product. It could do bad things for people, and you need to be part and lead an organization, making sure that processes that are in place, training, awareness, education, all of those component pieces were well implemented. We actually had a factory that we shut down for 4 months. And we had to start the factory up after 4 months. And that was, as you can imagine, really difficult to do, but we were successful in doing that. Through that entire ordeal, what I learned was empathy, because you had to have a different understanding, not only to be the commander in charge and trying to lead things, but you had to deal with all different people, regulatory authorities, government authorities, state, local, people in the company, the board of directors in your association. So you had to really be very smart and really savvy about how to obviously provide the right lessons going forward, but also making sure that this wouldn't happen again. So you had to be very disciplined and dedicated in that approach. So the three areas for me in my leadership, one was humility. The second one for me was business acumen. And the third one was empathy.
Looking to improve your supply chain? At Trustwell, we've been connecting the dots between the food industry and data for over 40 years to give you more control and visibility across the full supply chain. Our comprehensive Food Logic platform and our new Genesis Foods set a new standard for compliance, transparency, and quality across the food industry. Request a demo today. The link is in the show notes, or visit us at trustwell.com. That's an incredible experience. And it kind of leads us into, the next topic that I wanted to talk about is really about product development. And I'm sure over your career, you've seen that process change. And based on what you were talking about with the recall and all of that, what have you seen in the last 30 years and how products are developed and how has that changed for you?
It's a great question, and it's really a peek underneath the tent of what takes place in these major and minor food companies regarding product development. When I first started product development, the beauty of it was you were assigned one project, and you worked on that one project for whatever it took, a year and a half, 2 years. And so you had a chance to really understand the ideation process, all the consumer testing, all the component pieces of prototyping, protocepting, all these weird words that we use, concept testing, IHUT testing. And so you got a real good chance in order to experience what it takes in order to bring a product from an idea through commercialization to being on the store shelves. What has happened over the course of the last couple of years is that individual now is balancing between 5 and 10 projects because the pace is so fast. Innovation is what guides and what differentiates companies. So if you think about what you learned before, you have to now do that so much faster. Now, the beauty is we have a lot more tools. We have a lot of smart people that have studied various fields. And so you have a lot more teamwork that I think is associated with the development. And so we had these things called work stage gates, which has very disciplined approach in what you do at each one of the stages. You make sure that before you proceed to the next stage, your finances are in order, your consumer testing order, your capital spend is in. So there's actually a much more disciplined approach because there's so much that is being thrown at you. You have to be very methodical, disciplined, and determined as you go forward. And that's what has enabled a lot of these food companies to have so many innovations, or more importantly, renovations. Renovation is a term that we use that's a quality improvement of an existing product. And you continually quality improve your products. You just don't throw out a product and hope that it becomes like an Oreo, that it stays in existence forever without changing. A lot of times you have to change your products and you have to make sure you're very careful and you do that. I know, we'll talk a little bit later about heavy users, et cetera, but there's different ways that you test to make sure. So I'm really excited about what's happened in the new product development, the new cycle, but we always have to be very careful. Consumers are still consumers. They were consumers 30 years ago, and they're consumers today, and they'll be consumers 30 years in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of bringing together the ends of your career, when you're working with new products, how do you ensure that all of that product development is in place and the R&D is where it should be, and you're also taking into consideration the food safety and quality?
A great question. A couple of things. First, I think the work streams have changed where the gating process is really more established and fundamentally used by the entire organization. I think in the past, there were maybe more silos, and the silos sort of people protected their area. Today, there's no way that you could be in a silo and operate at the speed and the exactness of what's required in today's environment. And so the question around food safety, when the idea is actually initiated, I would have my food safety director part of that discussion. Give you an example. So the thing that people always love is cookie dough. As kids, we, stuck our finger in the bowl, we licked it, all that fun stuff. Well, cookie dough actually is a live product. It has not been cooked. So the flour that's in there could have the pathogen in it, right? There have been cases where children have become very sick as a result of licking that. So while it's a very much a treat for kids, if you're a large company, you need to be very careful and make sure you're protecting your assets and your reputation. So I would always be very cautious about the opportunity to go into areas that we really couldn't protect or not do it in a risk-free environment. Now, you always take some risk, but in this particular case, was that a risk that the company would be willing to undertake? And you have to really balance and weigh those things out. But if you think about it, you have that up front, you have your marketing team up front. Perhaps marketing wants to put in an ad. And, I love my marketers, but they always want to push an ad to say something that, sometimes our products can't do that. So they'll have even an image of a picture and they'll have such a beautiful brown part of the cake. Well, I can't really make the cake that brown. It actually over time oxidizes. And so then you have to debate, discuss to make sure that you're not putting that person at any risk. You're not putting the company at any risk. You don't want the FTC to come and say, hey, you're doing false advertising. So that's another example of how you have to be very disciplined. Or you're thinking about ingredients. So people are always wanting to use novel ingredients. And they want to say, well, this novel ingredient cures headaches. And so does it really? Is there any testing that I need to do? Do I need to do a clinical study? What are the tests that I need to do to prove these things out? So you're very disciplined in your approach of doing these things. And sometimes you do need to lean over your skis. You need to do things in parallel. And that's what we do we do the development while you're doing the testing. And so you're hoping that things work complementary. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they don't. And if they don't, you have to pull the plug and start back again. So it's a fun environment. It's tense, but it's enjoyable. And, you work towards outcomes. And when the outcome is such that you have a great product at the right cost and consumers love it, everybody wins.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned the breaking down of silos within the organization. What do you think is the most effective way, whether it's communication or tools or any technology? Like, how do you make sure that everybody is on the same page and you don't have to pull the plug and start over?
I think that's where I call the HU, the human element, is so important. And the reason is that people bring people together. Products don't jump off of the R&D table and jump into the grocery store. People have to do that. I've worked together with some great project managers that really know how to bring the different disciplines together in order to have a win-win for the organization. I've also worked together with fantastic CEOs that understand that the incentive structure can actually help that. So if you incentivize the group to win, as opposed to sometimes individuals win, you find that people tend to want to work together because they want to win together. And so to me, that really is first and foremost. Number two, you need to have people that are pretty smart. The reality of it is that you're dealing with the science of foods. And in the science of foods, there are things that potentially could go wrong. You really need to have people that understand science, understand technology, understand what things could go wrong. We're dealing sometimes with live organisms. We talk about pathogens. They do exist. If you're in a facility, you need to have people that understand GMP, which is good manufacturing practices. We talked later about, HACCP, which is hazard analysis critical control points, which are ways that you control, making sure that at key points along the process, you're actually avoiding having a serious situation. So you put in, either steps to kill pathogens or you put in steps in order to reduce. So all of these component pieces are important. And you need to have a great cross-functional team to do that. And it's just not the technical people, it's also the salesperson. We have to work together with our salesperson to make sure that the salesperson doesn't put a product in an environment where it may mold. So, some products, they don't last very well in the heat. If the salesperson has a great promotion, but it's in Arizona, I need to then tell that person, hey, if you're not in an air-conditioned room, I can't really advise you to do that. Or what happens when it goes from my truck to the warehouse and it sits outside for 2 hours? So all of these pieces is when you get together with the group and you're all talking about what your vulnerabilities are, you work together to try to tamp those down and make sure that everyone is thinking positively about the great things that this product is going to deliver for the company.
And kind of going back to another thing that you said earlier was about changing ingredients, which can happen. So, can you share an example of a major product development project, where you had to change an ingredient? And how did you manage that process and the quality and food safety alongside managing risk with changing ingredients?
Yeah, so this one will be an interesting one. Hopefully it'll touch upon each one of the points. So we had a product that had what I would say is premature mold. And so the manufacturing facility made the product, it was distributed, and we all of a sudden started to get calls back from some of the retail manufacturers that consumers were complaining that the product was molding. And we were like, ooh, that's pretty interesting because the design of the product, and you go through HACCP, as we said, and you go through the product design in this particular area, there's something called water activity. And we had made sure that the water activity was below a certain number. And so from the product design and distribution, we really didn't understand what was happening. So we were able to secure the product back from the marketplace. And obviously the management team said, well, what can we do to change the product or to improve the process so that we can get this back on the market? We're losing money, right? So this is where you have to do something quick. So we brought products back. We did an analysis, and lo and behold, we found that there were two systems. One was let's call it like a bread system. Another one was a gel system. And when you actually put them together, what happened was one sort of was missable in the other, and it caused that one to be a little bit softer and raise the water activity. So we're like, oh, wow, okay, we have an opportunity here to slightly modify the product design. And so we had a really great food scientist that figured out different preservative systems and humectants, which can help in control water, and rebuilt the product design. But then we said, we can't have this happen again. This is too costly of a situation. Is there something we can do with the process as well? Not just the product, but the process. And somebody came up with a unique way of spraying something on it that would actually help further. And so we invested in that particular solution. And lo and behold, we now had a quality improved product that actually made it in the marketplace without any issues. So what did that really take? It took, accepting that you weren't perfect. It took getting the right people in the room. I always say, never good to be the smartest person in the room. Always invite others. And so we had the right people in the room. And we had a management team that was willing to allow us to experiment. And, as soon as we had something, we said, we think we have the right outcome that everybody's going to be pleased with. And that management team accepted that. And then we moved forward with that product in the marketplace.
Wow, that's a great example. And I think it's really relevant right now with what's happening in the regulatory space. I kind of wanted to just talk to you about what is your take on what's going on with regulatory currently? And, I know there's a lot of talk about specifically ingredient swapping with things like artificial colors. So talk to me about that and where you see that headed.
I would say the US is an area that has really grown innovation faster than anywhere in the world. A little bit of that is tied up in how our regulations are implemented or leveraged versus how other people. And I've worked in the other countries, so I'm pretty familiar with all the regulatory environments. One of the things that we have to be, looking at ourselves in Europe, I think if you go in the books, they have about 3,000 approved ingredients that manufacturers can use, right? And they make obviously similar products than we make here. The US, in contrast, we have 10,000. And to have 3 times as many ingredients is a little bit awkward. Europe has 550 million people. The US has 325. I don't know why we need to have that many ingredients. What you do is you go back and you start to see that we have a very fast process to get ingredients approved. And I think that's what the administration and what a lot of regulatory folks are checking and looking again. Do we have a process that is fundamentally flawed? Do we have one that is fundamentally good but needs help? Or do we have to start again and do that? So we have a process in the US called GRAS, GRAS. It means generally recognized as safe. And it was a way that the food companies could actually do their own research and do their toxicology and safety studies, but get ingredients approved faster. Nowhere else in the world do they have that. And therefore, it takes a lot longer for them to develop products. And one would argue that there's a little bit more push in terms of that. The US doesn't have it. We could call our system flawed, or we could call it opportunistic. We believe that we do go through and do the right work in order to prove safety. And so we feel that that's proper. We do, though, understand that consumers have a different view now of artificial colors, artificial flavors. And that part of it, I think it's incumbent upon us as the food industry to modify. If consumers are, they don't want to have these colors that are coming from petrochemical industry. Well, what does that mean? Well, to change this, and I've done this in my past, changing colors is very, very difficult because consumers become very accustomed to seeing these colors and they like them. If you go to a red color that's not as vibrant, will that consumer still buy that product? The answer is we have lots of data that says they won't. So you now, as a company, okay, I can put in the right red in there, but now you're not going to buy my product. So my sales are going to go down and it's a lose-lose. So we have to really think through how we bring ingredients to the marketplace, make sure we're doing the right safety, but just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't say that just because something is artificial, it's bad. We have genetically modified organisms in this country. We have beet sugar and we have cane sugar. Those are two different sources. We haven't thrown that one out yet. So we have to be very cautious with what we chose. And we have to have a process in place that validates what we do is acceptable. Because I think if you get too far down the artificial, you're going to inflame both consumers. You definitely will increase cost. And the quality of what we do as an industry may not be that good anymore. So instead of me saying I would just switch everything to natural, I would say, what's the process in place to ensure that it's whatever I put in is validated, consumers accept the validation. I want to be transparent, but that validation process is an accepted process from regulators, from companies, from whoever. That part of it to me is what's most important.
Yeah. And you bring up some really good points. So being in this position, how do you balance the innovation, the creativity, plus the consumer demand and potentially regulations at the same time?
And that's not going to be easy to do. I know most of my colleagues in the food industry are challenged with that right now because one is the regulations are unclear right now. And we sort of are waiting to see what we are thinking we can do. So I think people are moving forward cautiously. In fact, I'm part of a food association where we have our national meeting starting next week, and there'll be lots of topics that are discussed around this. We still haven't finished the whole genetically modified organisms. That just has taken, it seems like a back seat. But if you remember 3 or 4 years ago, most consumers didn't want to have GE foods. And so that's still not gone away. It just seems that's gone low. Then we got into sugar versus high fructose corn syrup. That still hasn't gone away. It's just been reduced. Right now, the big thing is artificial colors, right? And now we have, regulations that say, these particular 7 that, like blue number 1 and 2, red 40, yellow 5, and all of these colors are being taken out of what we call the generally recognized as safe. So now they're going to ban those, but they're giving companies up to a year or 2 years in order to take those out of their foods. That's going to be tough. And consumers are going to recognize the challenge, the cost, the timing. It may change, how people look at foods going forward. So your question was, how do you do it all at the same time? Part of this is I really like the discipline associated with the stage gate process, because when you have the idea up front, we can basically ask everybody across the cross-functional your opinion. And people can freely weigh in whether or not they want to do it or not. I mean, we have this all the time. Somebody will say, I want to do a peanut product. And the food safety person says, well, I am not sure that my factory is good enough that I can separate out the peanut allergen, and I don't want to have cross-contamination. Unless you give me this money to have a separate room to do that, I'm not supporting this project. Okay. You have another person in marketing says, well, I want to have this product that's I can market to 12-year-old kids or 10-year-old kids, but it has a fairly higher level of sugar. Well, somebody may say from the legal perspective, I'm not sure I want to have my name out there that, someone from the group is going to say you're putting sugar and you're poisoning our kids with sugar. So I think today's environment is much more open where people debate in the room prior to this thing going forward. Whereas in the past, quite frankly, sometimes products were on the shelves and then people were figuring out how to modify them because, somebody said this is not the right way to go about it. So I'm very pleased. And I know a lot of food organizations spend a lot of time up front, which is so critical so that you can move quickly, expediently, but then go forward and later on not question, well, why did we not do this? Or why didn't we not do that? And again, we're not 100% perfect, but I see a lot more discussions happening up front across this cross-functional area. And we invite everybody to offer their insight at that point in time.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. And I wanted to go back to another thing that you said earlier, which is, about quality improvement of products with heavy users. So maybe talk me through that a little bit and what that looks like.
Yeah, so consumer testing, when you do product development, there's really three areas of what we focus in on. One, we do something called a CLT, which is central location test, typically like a mall intercept. So if you've ever been in a mall and somebody ask you to fill out a questionnaire and they bring you behind a room, they give you a bit of an incentive, you do that. And it's typically A versus B. And what people are trying to do is statistically understand, is there a preference in terms of one versus the other? It gives the developers a little bit of a peek underneath the tent. Do I need to do more development or am I okay? The second one is something called IHUT, which is in-home use tests. What that means is the consumer actually takes the product home. And you typically do that when it involves a preparation because you can't prepare it really in the mall and everybody prepares stuff differently. You want to make sure that when they're doing the rating of the product, they're doing it based upon how those consumers are rating that. So you do that and you get a better view of how consumers are using it, their liking, purchase intent, and all of that stuff. The third area is we call beta testing. Beta testing is like when you use a small market test. So you may go to an area in, Schaumburg in Illinois, right? And you may just do the test in that area. You work together with the retailers and you say, I want this 6 stores to carry this particular product. This is the price point. And I want to see how volume moves. I want to see how it's accepted, et cetera. That way you get a better view of how that product potentially will perform in the marketplace. So you have all these consumer ways that you can test product. When you get into the consumer groups and the demographics, we tend to use heavy users if we want to make a change of a product. We don't use heavy users for innovation alone because we want it to be a lot broader. But heavy users are something that helps protect what we call franchise risk. And when you get into consumer testing, there's two things. There's alpha risk and beta risk. One is an opportunity risk and one is a franchise risk. And you want to use the heavy users sometimes because they're more sensitive to changes in product. But you have to be careful. And so sometimes heavy users, while they'd be more sensitive, because they really like your brand, they may not say anything as well. They may just say, they just had a bad day. But normally this product is really absolutely fantastic. So you have to really understand what type of heavy users. And the way you get around that is you do post questions, right? So you can probe a little bit as to why they made the decision to do X, Y, or Z. And when you see their response, it gives you more confidence of what they meant when they did the answer. So heavy users are a very important part, but you have to know when to use them and you have to know how to use the data to allow you to make better decisions going forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And having them in the context of what they're saying and how they feel about the brand. So I'd like to end kind of on looking towards the future. So, what are your thoughts about where we're headed with technology, AI, automation, and, where do you see us in 10 years from now with the advancements we're currently making?
I think we're going to have to leverage our regulatory agencies to be a lot faster and a lot more disciplined because the consumer's expectation is still high. So while they may say they prefer, natural. If that natural is not coming every week, they're going to get bored. And so if they get bored, that means companies are going to lose money. So we have to figure out, and it goes back to your question that you asked me, we have to do all these things together. We're going to have to think about how to do testing together. That's where I think AI can actually help us, because one, it could do not only predictive modeling, it can also do future-based modeling. And that is really the opportunity for the food industry to grasp that and figure out different ways of how to use what I would say is large language models and implement the areas that we have worked in for the last hundreds of years so that it can learn what worked, what didn't work, what could work. And so we have to feed it. And I am a little bit nervous that we're not feeding it enough at this moment. And so it can walk away with a predictive model that may not be based in our learnings. So if you think about what, you see all these programs that are on TV, people are feeding these large language models learnings so that they can better understand what's been tried, what worked, and what didn't work. So for me, that would be the first thing. The next thing is I call it my 4 A's: affordability, availability, accessibility, and acceptability. We all have to think those ones through, because there is a economics, there's a social construct to what I mean by what I say. Because there's 9 billion people, we're not going to be able to feed everybody through the traditional means of farming. We do need new technology to grow crops faster, safer. We know we're having issues with aquifers and depletion of water. So we need to figure out how to grow, the right proteins, the right carbohydrates, the right fats in different environments. We need to spend a lot more time on thinking about the soil, the nutrients in the soil. There's a lot of work that's ongoing now around agronomy and seeing that the vitamins and minerals of a lot of the crops that we had are going down in value. Well, why is that? Are we tilling the soil too much? Are we not allowing enough nutrients back in the soil because we have to produce soy so quickly, we're not rotating the crops? So I think there's a lot more, again, AI, I think is going to be an enabler in order to unlock that and get us a bit clever with what we had going on. So those are sort of the areas I look at it. First and foremost, fast, quick regulatory, get this GRAS process back in order so that companies can believe in something. We need to be clear when we're talking to our consumers. I'm very steeped in scientists, understanding and explaining food. I know we have a lot of people that go on the internet and read Google and become food experts. We have to be really careful because they don't know what they don't know. I know they want to make a quick buck, but there are things that they don't know, and they could be leading people down a pathway that's not right. And then the last thing, again, my 4 A's: affordability, accessibility, availability, and accessibility. I think those are the areas of focus.
And looking back at your career, what legacy do you hope to leave to this industry?
Yeah, so 3 areas. First for me would be staying disciplined and determined. Continue to learn, continue to teach, continue to mentor. There's so many new people that are coming into this industry. We have to be very, very thought-provoking, ask them questions. That would be number 1. Number 2, I'll go again, never be the smartest person in the room. Go out and seek people. I mean, I go to lots of different associations. I am floored with the intelligence of what people know about ingredients, about nutrients, about nutrition. It is amazing. Let these people be the ones that are actually the people that are speaking. We have so many people that are talking that really don't know what they're saying. We have so many intelligent people. I want them to be the ones that are, in the microphone, talking and teaching and coaching. And then the third is, I would say, you have to be courageous. In the area of food safety, oftentimes you may be the only and the lone voice in the room. I've experienced this where you had to make a tough decision and no one else supported that decision, but a few people, and they knew it was the right decision. But it really involved you being courageous. And the reason why I say that's so important is, and I would tell people this that are leading global quality organization, I would always say, stay true to the person that looks you back in the mirror. That's the only person that's going to critique what it is that you've done.
Well, I think that's great advice for anyone to look back on and be able to say that they did that. So thank you so much, Darryl. This has been really awesome. I mean, we got into a lot of technical stuff and new things and talked about the future and everything. So I really appreciate the time. And I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of our audience did as well.
Lydia, I really appreciate your time, and thank you again for having the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of Food Tech Talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. Make sure to subscribe. And if you love the podcast, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Trustwell and request your free demo of our technology platform that connects food formulation, products, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit us at www.trustwell.com and click Get Started, or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Thanks for listening.